Welcome to the Lentil Intervention Podcast, talking all things movement, whole food nutrition and environmental wellness with your hosts, Ben and Emma.
Hello everybody, and here we are, episode 2. We made it, Emma.
We did. Hello everyone. Hi Ben, how are you going?
Good. So, like we said, episode 2, really excited, and thank you to everyone that has listened so far to our first episode. And we did kind of sort of drag things on a little bit with the our social media, but we are super stoked to let you know that we have an Instagram account, we have a Facebook page, all under the name of the Lentil Intervention, and go on, follow it, like it, and share it, and that's where we're going to grow our community.
Yep, absolutely. And if you have any hot topics you want covered or any guests that you'd love to hear from, do let us know.
Absolutely. So, who have we got on the show today? Our very, very first guest.
Oh, I'm really excited about this one. We've actually got a stellar guest lined up for you guys. So we'll be talking to Dr. Luke Wilson today. So he's based in Wellington, New Zealand, and splits his time between general practice, his business called Two Zesty Bananas, which I just love that name. And he also keeps busy presenting at events and conferences around the world. In addition to his medical degree, he holds a master's in psychology. He's completed the Cornell certificate in plant-based nutrition and is certified by the International Board of Lifestyle Medicine. And he actually was the first New Zealand member for the American College of Lifestyle Medicine. He's worked alongside the likes of Dr John McDougall, Dr Michael Klaper, and Dr Alan Goldhamer at the McDougal Health and Medical Centre and the True North Health Centre.
What a list of credentials. Seriously, what a first guest we've got there.
Oh, but it goes on. It gets better.
Oh, no. Here we go. I'll have a sip of my peppermint tea while you carry on.
Okay. So Luke also serves on the board of directors and is the New Zealand Ambassadoc for the health promotion charity Doctors for Nutrition. I'm also tied up with that.
That's right.
Charity, so I'm keen to talk to him about that. Basically, he's helped hundreds of people transform their lives by adopting a plant-based lifestyle.
Now, one of the big reasons why we have him on the show is that we want to talk to him about the broad study, which he was the co-author of. We're going to dive into this well-known study. Now, well-known, why do I say that? Because I am holding Dr. Greger's How Not to Diet book. It is his latest book that was released end of last year. And in, I don't know what chapter it is, but he makes reference. Dr. Greger makes reference to this broad study. So internationally renowned. We'll definitely go into more of this with our discussion. But if you've never heard of the study, it resulted in the best weight loss ever recorded in a non-calorie restricted dietary intervention. So it's going to be an absolute treat talking through the details with Luke, and we've got a whole lot of questions lined up. So shall we get Luke on the call?
I think we should, yes.
Let's do it. Luke, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Luke.
Oh, thanks, guys. It's a real honour to be on your podcast, which I listened to the first episode last week, and I was very impressed.
Thank you very much.
You're too kind.
You've put Wellington on the map for our stats, which I'm looking at closely. So thanks for that, Luke. Hey, Luke. I'm actually going to start off with a little story for our listeners, because the three of us actually know each other. We've known each other for a little while, and my story about when I first met you was probably, what are we now, April? Probably exactly 2 years ago, when I was starting to expand with the workshops that I was delivering on plant-based nutrition. And I brought it down to Wellington, and I was given a heads up that at my first, because I did two in a row on the same weekend. At my first one, this was Hannah O'Malley. She told me, hey, Dr. Luke Wilson's going to be at your first one. He's really involved in this community. Make sure you meet him after. And for me, I was actually super nervous, because I knew a little bit about the work you had done, which we're going to talk about. And anyway, I got through the whole workshop, and I was expecting you to stand up and say, look, actually I disagree with what you're saying, or put me on the spot with a tricky question, which you didn't, so thank you for that. But anyway, you came up to me after, and that's where we properly met, you thanked me and you said, great work, keep it up. And my whole point of this story is that you, Luke, gave me the confidence to keep building on what I've been doing and to be doing what I'm doing now. So thank you very much.
That's awesome. Thanks for sharing that. It's really nice.
Yeah,
and it was a great talk, though. I was impressed, and I was really interested in learning something from someone who has some background in the sporting side more, because that's not where I'm coming at it from. But it's obviously something that most of us are interested in. So yeah, it was really neat.
No, that's awesome. And then a whole year later, you were actually my guest presenter at the next Wellington workshop. So funny how things have turned around, and now here you are as a guest again.
Yeah, moved up in the world.
What's next? You'll be a co-host with us, maybe, Luke. Anyway, so look, we've Emma's read out a quite a lengthy list of credentials, and honestly, brilliant. The work you're doing and the background that you have. But to start off and I guess introduce yourself to our listeners, tell us the whole story as to why medicine, to start with, and was plant-based nutrition always part of their plan?
That's a really good question. So actually, medicine wasn't even my first choice. So I was doing psychology, and I was planning to become a clinical psychologist. And at some point, I decided that wasn't exactly what I was interested in. And I had a good friend who was doing medicine, and he said, why don't you give that a go? And I thought I wanted to do something where I could still use the skills that I'd built up over the years, learning what I had already. And I had always been quite interested, especially in health. So definitely was interested in nutrition. I was working out. I got into lifting weights and going to the gym and that kind of thing probably in my mid-teens. And so I'd been reading Men's Health and, these kinds of Arnold Schwarzenegger's Encyclopedia of Bodybuilding, these kinds of sources on nutrition and
reliable sources.
Yeah, exactly. So I already had quite a strong interest in health. So really my background wasn't so strong in the natural sciences. So that was really where I needed to go back to and learn more, because I hadn't really done those at high school. So I needed to go back and sort of start over doing all of that. So that was really how I ended up going into medicine, I suppose, was trying to use those skills that I'd picked up previously in my education and still apply them. And I'd always known that I wanted to do something where I felt like I was helping people and making a contribution back, I suppose, from the education and the opportunities that I'd had throughout my life, I suppose. So yeah, that was why medicine. As far as plant-based, interestingly enough, I'd actually been vegetarian since I was 4.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. So I had a pet lamb, and at some point she went back to the farm, and I found out what was going to happen to her when she got back there. And so at that point I decided I wasn't going to eat meat anymore. And this was the early 80s or mid 80s.
Yeah.
And so my parents were quite concerned about things like, was I going to get enough protein and iron and all these kinds of things? And to be fair to them, there probably wasn't a lot of information out there in New Zealand. So they were quite...
In the 80s, it was probably just Predican, really.
Yeah, exactly. And so basically they wanted me to make sure that I was still getting those things. And the way they knew to do that was making sure that I was still eating, at least... dairy and eggs and also fish. Not that I actually ate a lot of fish. That was probably something I'd have maybe once every couple of weeks at the most. But that was how I was eating. And I sort of just carried that on through basically up until the point that I got to applying for medical school and everything. And I suppose during my teenage years, when I was reading a lot around fitness and health and nutrition, and so these supposed sort of ideas about what really good nutrition was usually involved eating lots and lots of animal protein. And so I always thought I was kind of, unfortunately, I would never achieve the kind of health that was exemplified by the men on the cover of Men's Health. And so I always thought that I wasn't being quite as healthy as I could be, but it was a choice that I'd kind of made earlier on in my life, and I just sort of stuck with it at that point. But as I suppose I got more interested in that stuff, I was making sure that I was doing things like having the whey protein supplement, making sure I was having tuna maybe once, or sometimes even several times a week, in order to make sure that I was getting enough of these animal proteins and things like that that I thought would be conducive to my health. So
the traditional classics of low fat but high protein sources, which I can absolutely relate to for sure. Yeah.
Mm.
Mm-hmm.
So how did it actually become plant-based? Because was this during your studies?
It actually was. It was. So it was during, I think it was so it was 2009, which I think was my third year of medical school.
Yeah.
And it was about the same time, interestingly enough, of the swine flu epidemic. And so
that's right. Yeah.
Yeah. So it was around that time. And so basically what happened is, funnily enough, the entire flat got sick with a mysterious flu bug that had actually one of our flatmates, because it was a vegetarian flat, one of our flatmates, I think she was actually doing nutrition, and she hadn't had a cold or flu or anything for years and years and years. And finally she got one, which was this, and then it proceeded to make its way through the rest of the flat. And so my suspicion is that it was actually the swine flu. And so anyway, there was a bit of downtime then, and it was also around about the time that Barack Obama was, I think he'd been elected, and there was a lot of talk around his health reform. And I'd been really interested in his election in the first place and following him and, reading his books and things. And I was looking on an article that was written about his healthcare reform, and I scrolled down to the comments, and someone in the comments section had said, if President Obama wanted to really do something great for the health of the American people, then he'd read this book called The China Study, and that explains why people are so unhealthy and everything. And so
it's always the China Study.
It is always the China Study, isn't it?
And so I Googled it and, came across a Wikipedia article about what it was. And then from then I was able to find a PDF online of the China Study.
That's ambitious. A bloody 2,000-page book as a PDF.
Yeah. So I started reading it when in that situation, and I was fascinated by it because it was sort of right up my alley, because I was studying medicine at that point anyway, but also because it was essentially saying that what I had been doing all along was kind of on the right track. And in fact, the whey protein in my kitchen, I'd left that on the top of the microwave for the rest of the year. I don't remember what I ended up doing with it, but I certainly didn't touch that after I read. In fact, I think it was sort of one of those triple blends that had casein in there as well. And as you know, casein gets kind of a bad rap.
And probably leucine as well in there added.
Yeah, there was a whole bunch of stuff. And so I just stopped that right away, sort of. And so... Yeah, that was how I got into it. But what really piqued my interest
China Study,
was Dr. Esselstyn as well. Yeah, the China Study and the reversal of heart disease. I think that was really what fascinated me. That was super interesting to me. So, and obviously I was at home at this point with not much else to do, and so I just started ordering all the books that were recommended in there. And the first one, of course, that I ordered was Prevent and Reverse Heart Disease.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So, obviously I tried to find it online for free first. no chance. But, So
is that then how one thing led to another, which led to another, which then led you to applying for internships with the McDougal Health and Medical Centre and True North Health Centre? Is that then the continuation of that whole journey?
Yeah, 100%. So basically, once I read the China Study, so first off, and just go back to because I'd done psychology, and the interesting thing about psychology is everyone thinks, that's a real weak science, and psychology feels that, and so they've become very, I guess, concerned about people ever accusing it of being so not a hard science. And so because of that, most of the time that you spend in psychology is actually looking at studies, analysing them, and then sort of tearing them to shreds.
Yeah.
And
yep.
I had many classes, one that was run by Harleen Hayne, who's now the Vice Chancellor of Otago University, that was supposed to be about developmental psychology, supposed to be about kids and things, but it actually ended up being mostly just about destroying research papers, which I really enjoyed. And so having that kind of mindset about things, when I read the China study, I was skeptical because I knew that it was saying basically that what I'd been doing was really good. And so I wanted to make sure that I wasn't just deciding that this was the case because it suited my own bias and everything. Yeah. And so before I even told any of my mates about it and things, and before I gave it to anyone that I sort of respected to look at, I started reading, I started looking at some of the references and things and really sort of analysing it in that sense. So I needed to do that first before I really decided that that was something that I'd run with and share with other people. And then the other thing that I needed, so I read Dr. Esselstyn's book and became, the biggest Dr. Esselstyn fan. And one day I was on his website and I found that he was coming, and this must have been 2010, he was coming to Rotorua to do, of all places, to do a conference there. Yeah. And so I just had to go to that. I think it was like the day after a U2 concert that I was already going to in Auckland. And so
priorities.
Went to the concert. Yeah, totally. And then, drove back down to Rotorua and camped out at this sort of campground there that they were having this conference at, which was a CHIP conference.
Oh, okay,
and
cool.
Yeah. And so I remember there, so just sitting in there, and then he just turned up at the back and I was like, oh my gosh, that looks like Dr. Esselstyn. And I guess I was sort of one of the only people there. There was one other health professional there. I've found later on, I used to tell people there weren't any other health professionals there, but there was a nurse there as well. And yeah, I guess like no one else really knew who Dr. Esselstyn was, but for me, he was like this hero who had come up with the way to cure heart disease. And so I was just super excited. And then he gave his talk and he said, oh, we've got a surprise for you guys. There's this film that we're just making and it's not out yet, but we're going to, show you guys an early version of it tonight. And I was just like, oh my gosh, that's going to be forks over knives because I've been reading all about it. And so I saw that. And then the most important thing for me, I guess, was the opportunity to talk to him and Anne as well, and just to get some of the more details of the diet and things. And the other thing that was really neat the next day is that two of my psychology, previous psychology professors from when I was at Victoria University just turned up out of the blue. And these were two of them that, again, had been like some of the most skeptical people that I'd ever met, or ever been taught by. And I saw them and I was like, oh, what are you guys doing here? And they're like, oh, we're here for Dr. Esselstyn. And so when they said that, I was like, oh, wow, okay. So there's actually some really good, people that I really respect the opinions of that really, and the ability to kind of critique this stuff. Yeah. Who are really, as saying this is the right thing to be doing. And so that kind of like what you were saying, Ben, gave me a lot of confidence going forward that I wasn't just, I suppose, following this because it sort of appealed to, I suppose, the reasons that I'd been partially plant-based in the first place.
Yeah, it gave you more conviction, basically. Yeah.
Totally.
Man, what a story. What a weekend. Your ears were still ringing from U2 concert at Mount Smart, and there you are being blown away by some heroes, basically. So, what a back, which I never knew. So thank you. That's a
really cool story.
Yeah, for sure. So how did then the opportunity with Dr. John McDougall come about?
Yeah, so I'd read Dr. McDougall's books by this point, obviously, and to be honest, so I wanted to go back, and I knew probably Dr. Esselstyn or Dr. McDougall, and so Dr. Esselstyn doesn't do, as you're probably aware, he doesn't do sort of live-in programs. So for our internship, we needed, or our elective as it's called, we need someone who can supervise us for 3 months.
Yeah.
And so you actually need to be, so most people will do it at a hospital somewhere. Mm-hmm. And so then they're there every day. Well, as we saw last year, some of them weren't.
They go off overseas with the money and then get something dodgy signed off. So, yeah.
we won't talk about it. We won't go there. But anyways.
So if you want to study medicine, Emma, come to New Zealand and you get a free holiday thrown in at the end.
Thanks for the hot tip there.
Yeah. That was sort of never on my mind. I always, I was like, well, this is the perfect opportunity to go and learn from these guys.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so Dr. Esselstyn does like a one-day seminar. I guess it was every few months or something. So that obviously wasn't going to work. So I got in touch with Dr. McDougal and wrote to him, and he was really, they were really excited at that point because, again, this was early days. This was before forks over knives had really taken off and everything. So
excited because you were from outside of the US, or because it was still new, even within the US, in terms of the demand of wanting to go do an internship there, for instance?
I think because New Zealand,
Yeah.
So it's overseas. It's a long way away, and I think that was part of the reason. But they were lovely, and they're just like, yeah, of course you can come. We do a 10-day program at this time, and you're welcome to this. And
Brilliant.
The only issue is that we can't provide you anything for 3 months. And so I was like, oh gosh, what do I do? And so then I was looking, and I don't even know how I found this, but found out that True North was in in this
Dr. Klaper.
It's like literally down the road. And so then that was just sort of the perfect opportunity as I combined those two things. And so, obviously wrote to Dr. Klaper and Dr. Goldhamer and said, would you guys be all right with me going off to Dr. McDougal for 10 days? And they're like, yeah, no worries. So, and again, they were pretty excited to have someone from this part of the world as well, because again, probably even earlier days for them, because I think probably people didn't even really know about True North.
That's right.
Until what the hell, so so that was cool, and just ended up being perfect, because I guess, like I said before, Dr. Esselstyn, meeting him had given me the confidence to get started with this, but I hadn't had any experience actually working with patients and seeing them actually make these changes. So I'd read a lot of books with all the testimonials, as you do. I'd seen Forks Over Knives, but it all still seems a bit magical. And so that was really the thing that I picked up from this experience, was just seeing people getting better again, coming off their medications, and more than that, really seeing how excited it made them and how empowering it was for people. And they made us as interns at Dr. McDougall. My gosh, I think I used to get up at maybe 5 o'clock in the morning, or pretty damn early, because they needed us to do there was only 2 of us, and the other girl, was kind of a funny story. And this just demonstrates how early it was in the piece. And so she was American, and she was doing, I guess she was looking to do general practice or, family health in the States. And on the first day there, she whispers in my ear, she's like, oh, I've heard these guys are vegan. You're in for a bit of a shock. You're in for a bit of a rough day.
Brilliant.
So, so I was a smart student in some ways as well, because Dr. McDougall would he would do what he did, and he would say, have you guys got any questions? And I'll be like, nah, this is exactly what you say you're going to do in your books, and this is great. And of course, she would have all the questions and things, and so I ended up, by comparison, looking like I really knew my stuff.
Just out of interest, what happened with her by the end of the internship?
Have you stayed in touch with her? Do you know what she's doing today?
I haven't stayed in touch with her. No, I don't, and I should have.
I'd love to know.
But and she was, I think it was really eye-opening for her, and so it was probably really, really useful. But she was still having a lot of questions, and I remember she had a debate with Jeff Novick at one point, and I was just like, oh my gosh, what are you doing? Because these guys to me are just, the legends of this, and so especially Jeff. And so yeah, I think she was having some debate about whether people still needed to have milk though for calcium and all this kind of thing. And so, yeah, it was kind of an interesting experience in that sense. But anyway, back to the taking the blood pressures. That we, get up at 5 a.m. and we'd have to take these blood pressures on people, and you saw them just drop like a stone. And some of the young people were there, because actually it was so lucky for me as well, because Dr. McDougall was doing his multiple sclerosis study at that time. So we had people there that were coming as part of that MS study as well. And so you had young people too. And you'd have some as well, just generally anyway, that wanted to come along for different health problems or just out of interest, because they've been sort of eating plant-based for a while. But these people, these young people especially, they just have these blood pressures that just seemed, almost impossible, sort of 90 over 60, that kind of stuff, just consistently. And the others, I just saw that, the blood pressure drop, sort of in front of my eyes. So I could see that it was actually real, because I was the one who was taking those measurements. And I don't think that was part of Dr. McDougall's, grand scheme or anything to convince us, but it did a really good job of it. So, yeah. It was such a crazy time. It was just, amazing for me.
So this is just a perfect lead-in then into the broad study, because that would have given you, I presume, the inspiration to. Well, you tell us how the broad study came about. What does broad even stand for, and why Gisborne?
Yeah, right. So I guess, where to start?
Sorry,
with this?
Three-part question there. So firstly, why the broad study to start with?
Yeah, so the part of the story that I haven't talked about, and I suppose if we go back a little bit to
Please
me,
wanting
to check out about whether the China study was the right thing, was saying the right kinds of things. So I had some really good friends at medical school, Nick Wright and Matt Hobbs, and they're both plant-based doctors now as well.
Yes.
And those guys, I'd sent the China study to, and Nick actually basically repeated my elective. So I think he initially wanted to go somewhere like the Arctic or something crazy like that, but that fell through, and so he was, by that point he'd read the China study and all the, Dr. Esselstyn and Dr. McDougal stuff, so he was pretty keen to go as well. So he went along too, and had, similar experience to what I had by all accounts. And so what ended up happening was the three of us were wondering, because we get our first year out of medical school, you get to choose where you want to go in the country. It's sort of like a lottery, not really lottery, probably the wrong word for it, but kind of like a system where you sort of get assigned to a certain hospital, but you try and apply for, you rank everything in order and all that kind of thing. And so the three of us thought, well, why not Gisborne? Because Gisborne, for one, it doesn't have any registrars or it doesn't have any registrars, so that means that the house officers, so that's what you are when you first graduate, means that you're working directly with the consultants who are sort of like the senior doctors. And so we wanted to sort of push ourselves and challenge ourselves. We also, Matt was quite a keen surfer, and fancied ourselves as maybe being able to take that up. We also liked the fact that it was going to be really sunny and good produce and good wine and that kind of thing. And also we liked that it was Gisborne has pretty close to 50% of the population there is Māori, and we also really liked that aspect as well. So there's a bit of a sort of culture there as well, which was different from the rest of New Zealand. So we thought that'd just be a really neat place to go to get started. And also, wouldn't it be great if the three of us, because medical school in at Otago, you split up into three different groups after your third year. And so you either stay in Dunedin, which is what I did, or you go to Christchurch, which is what Matt did, or you go to Wellington, which is what Nick did. And so we all ended up in three different places, but we all still were really passionate about plant-based. And so we all, decided that we'd go to Gisborne together. And so that's what we ended up doing. So that was why Gisborne. And then I suppose the idea for the study, so the idea for the study was originally Nick's idea, and basically, I think where it came from for all of us, really, and Matt even before, so he and his partner had their first kid, and so they ended up actually moving back to Christchurch before we could start with Broad, but otherwise he certainly would have been involved as well, and he was involved in some of the early meetings and that kind of thing. But basically, we'd all worked in the hospital by this point, when we'd started thinking about it, and Nick had started making inquiries, was probably, we'd been there for at least 9 months or so, and what we'd seen is just Gisborne actually has some of the highest rates, actually the highest rate of type 2 diabetes, obesity in the country. It's also, one of the most deprived areas in New Zealand, socioeconomically speaking.
Yeah.
And
due to its remoteness, so for our listeners that are not from New Zealand, it's, Gisborne can be quite isolated.
Yeah, that too. And so I guess what we saw in the hospital was we saw, people coming in with these illnesses that we knew were completely preventable. You would see people literally dying of skin infections and that kind of thing that they were predisposed to because of having the diabetes.
Yeah.
And so we were just, the whole time we were there, we were treating the end sort of effects of these illnesses, and sometimes people will get better and sometimes they wouldn't. I mean, one time we felt like it was ineffective. At one time I had this, because it's a small place too, you see the same patients again and again. Yeah. I had this he wasn't too old, I think in his mid-60s, Māori gentleman who had just retired, and he'd been out on the golf course, and he'd had what we call it, well, what you guys will call like a funny turn, or we would call like a transient ischemic attack or a mini stroke. And he came into hospital, and we admitted him, and he stayed overnight. We monitored things, and we discharged him on some aspirin, and that's what we did for him. And then the next, within sort of maybe 3 to 6 months from then, he came back and had a full-on stroke.
Oh gosh, okay.
And so probably I think he ended up being discharged to rest home, and I'm not sure whether he, what his functioning ended up being after that. But to me, it seemed, and Nick and Matt would be able to speak to stories, multiple stories like that as well that they would have experienced too. And it's like really the best that we can do for these people is give them an aspirin, And so
you're mopping up the water and not turning off the tap.
Exactly. So that was kind of how we were feeling, and we also felt like we had this information and these skills. And one other thing was, sorry, I'm lengthening these stories out. No, you guys aren't getting a word in edgeways. Yeah. But we also did these. We would do these. You'd have journal clubs, right? And so what a journal club is, you're allowed to take in a journal article and talk to everyone there from your team is there, and so you would have all the senior clinicians. So the medical. The medical consultants and their house officers and everyone. So you get to present a journal, not a journal, sorry, an article from a journal. Mm-hmm. And so we at various times had decided, of course, that we would take along Dr. Esselstyn's work, or we'd take along Dr. Ornish's work. And I remember one of the objections from Dr. Ornish's, and basically generally to these things, is people would say, "Oh, that's very interesting." The consultants would say, "But this is in the States, and there's no way that anyone would do that in Gisborne." And so that was part of the motivation as well. I think was to, for me at least, was to show that yes, we could do this in New Zealand, and yes, even Gisborne. And so that's I think that kind of desire to give something back to the community from the knowledge that we had. Like I really felt for me, and was that we'd really been given a lot of opportunity by the likes of Dr. McDougal, by the likes of Dr. Klaper, Dr. Goldhamer, and those guys, Jeff Novick and Doug Lyle at the McDougal program as well. We'd really been given a lot of knowledge and opportunity, and me with Dr. Esselstyn, to really push this further and to sort of pay back some of the work that they had done. Yeah. And so this really was, I suppose, one of the motivations for me as well, not just to give something back to the community where I was living, but also to give something back to the plant-based community and to do something with the skills and the knowledge that I had and the opportunities that I had. So that was really one of my motivations. And I guess one of the most exciting things for me was that when I found out that the study had been published, I actually found out from a post from Dr. McDougall.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Gone full circle. That's amazing.
Yeah. So he didn't even know that it was me.
Okay.
And so like, he's just like, I just found this study it was sort of the middle of the night. I think I'd been out with some friends or something, and I came back and I was scrolling through Facebook, and there was Dr. McDougall saying that the study had come out, and then I got a message from Jeff, because the funny thing was I'd sent Jeff a Facebook message. I'm sure he won't mind me telling you this, but I'd sent him one saying, "Hey Jeff, we're doing the study, and do you want to be involved? And we'd really appreciate some of your advice around it, that kind of thing, and can we use some of your work?" And I never heard anything back. And then I got this message from Jeff saying, I've just seen this message. Like, once he realized the study was out and everything, he must have, been looking because he was wondering whether it was me or whatever. And so, he was looking to message me. And then, of course, when he looked on his message request or wherever it was, there was this thing saying, "Hey, Jeff, can you help out with this?"
Do you want to be a part of it?
yeah. But he was just super stoked about it, and that really to me was so rewarding, almost more so than actually having it published. Just that those guys had found that were excited about it and had felt like some of the stuff that they'd been teaching us, I suppose, had been useful.
But Luke, in your planning, when you first sort of plan the whole concept of the broad study, did you foresee the potential significance that the study could have? And what I mean by that is why this is such an important study. The way I see it is there are so many documentaries, there's so many books, there are so many studies that are based on the US sort of system, the environment, right, within the US. And it's so easy to be sitting anywhere else in the world, in New Zealand, Australia, anywhere else, and think, well, we don't really eat like that, or we don't really farm like that, or we don't spray these kind of chemicals because our system doesn't allow it, etc. But to have a study that is so close to home, based on our environment, based on our way of eating, our way of living, and so on, and to have this outcome, I mean, that's massive. It's achieving so much more than we I think realize for most people. And I'm quoting here from Dr. Greger's book, the record-breaking study. And it is in so many senses. It's achieved more than just a study. Its significance is huge because it's not a US-based study.
Yeah, absolutely. And the real world nature of the research, Luke, it's just fantastic that we actually have something local to this side of the world, and all of the arguments against things like the Ornish study, Esselstyn's work can't be done here. Well, you've proven that it can be. This wasn't done in a lab. These were real world people out in the world making their own food choices. And you had fantastic results at the end of 12 months as well, like long-term results, which is just amazing.
Yeah, thanks, guys.
Well,
yeah.
Well, Luke, I mean, this study initially started off as a 12-week study. That's all you aimed for it to be, wasn't it? Before it became a year long.
We'd always planned on doing the 6-month follow-up.
Right.
So that part of it was always built in. And then
Can we take a step back and actually, for the benefit of our listeners, what did the study entail? What were you trying to achieve? What was the process?
Right. So...
And actually, before I forget, what does broad stand for? What does it mean? Sorry, because I know, I put so many questions forward.
I've been asked that a few times. And so Nick, he'd obviously read through like a lot of these papers where they always have some kind of acronym and it's kind of a word and it sounds cool. Yeah. And so I think what had happened is he'd come up with broad. And I think the idea was that there was sort of like many benefits. So he thought,
Right.
broad benefits or something like
Okay.
that. And then
Yep.
he tried to make it into something that was, that every letter stood for something.
Yes.
And I looked at it and I was like, oh, I think you're kind of stretching things. That doesn't really make sense. But by that point, so I was like, I was kind of in favour of changing the name to something that did make a little bit more sense. But Patrick, who was one of the senior doctors who sort of was, I suppose, contributing and supervising to some extent, he was like, oh, no, I really like the name Broad. We should keep it as Broad. And so we just rolled with it at that point.
I wonder if it was inspired by a TV series called Broadchurch that was quite big a few years ago. So maybe that's where it came from. Who knows?
Who knows? But it's yeah. I mean, that was pretty much a large part of what happened with the study anyway. A lot of it was just sort of make it up as you go along kind of thing, and just sort of not. It was very grassroots. It was very sort of WA Kiwi kind of stuff, and that was, I suppose, part of what we ended up doing.
Yeah.
So basically, what it was a lifestyle intervention that we did for people in Gisborne, and we took people from one general practice just because we thought it would be easier that way, just to choose people from that particular patient population, and when we first started out, we were looking to do more something on cardiovascular risk factors, but what we ended up doing, making the entry criteria, because Gisborne being quite small, is we said that basically people needed to have they either needed to have an increased BMI, so that would be over 25, or they needed type 2 diabetes or ischemic heart disease, or the risk factors for that, so blood pressure, increased blood pressure or cholesterol. And what we ended up with was a group that was aged 35 to 70, and probably the reason that the group is a little bit older is because we were looking especially for the kinds of things that develop after you've been overweight for a while, so the ischemic heart disease and the type 2 diabetes particularly. And so we ended up getting two groups randomized, essentially 30 in each group when we started out. And then so what we did is, with one group, we took them through our program, which was a 12-week program where they met twice a week, and for most sessions, half of the time that we met, they would be either doing a group cooking session with some chefs that we had at the local polytechnic. They would be doing, which they didn't enjoy quite as much, a talk from us. After that, they got sort of the information, and what we tried to do with it was keep it really practical, because one of the things that we had experienced in the States was it was great having these live-in programs. So Dr. McDougall and obviously True North. So you go and you stay there, and people will come from around the country, around the world even. And so that was great, but they were sort of out of their natural environment, if you like.
It's a fully immersive environment, so you just do as you're told and you don't think about it. Whereas what you're doing here is you're instilling, I guess, the ability to make a choice. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. And that was, I think, one of the things that we really wanted to sort of improve upon is, I'd kept in touch with several of the participants from McDougal, and, some of them do really, really well, and some of them sort of fall back a little bit. And I think it is quite tricky when you go, because you wouldn't necessarily come with your whole family even to True North or to Dr. McDougall, but you go back and then all of a sudden you're back amongst all your families and friends that are doing exactly the same things as when you left, and maybe the same things as you left. Not knowing whether you should be eating, or the things that you knew that you shouldn't be eating, they're all back in the cupboard as soon as you get back. And as you guys probably know, they taste like 20 times better if you haven't been eating them for a while. So it was easy for people to trip up. So what we did is we'd have these people twice a week, and we saw them for 12 weeks. We also we try to keep it real practical, talk about the cooking and the how to make food taste good as well in our sessions, not just talking about health stuff, even though that was what we were super interested in as doctors. And
so
just
you're
trying to
not telling them how much to exercise or anything like that. You're not actually including that component, are you?
No, there was no requirement to exercise.
Mm-hmm.
The interesting thing I found, and one of the first people that I really, well, managed to help out in the hospital setting was this guy, Larry, who came in with, I think at the point he came in, he was about 150 kgs or something like that, maybe even more. And basically, he had this long list of health conditions. And when I first saw that I had to admit him and things, he was coming in for he had sleep apnea, and so all that he was coming into hospital for, you'd think he'd come into hospital so we could help him out with any of these things, but those were managed in the community. We were just helping him out with seeing whether it would be useful for him to have BiPAP, which is helping his, assisting his airway and all that while he's sleeping, so he's not waking up multiple times at night. And so I was admitting him just for that. So he's just going to staying overnight. And I saw this list of conditions and his weight and everything. I was just like, oh gosh, this. At first I was kind of angry because it was extra work for me to do. But I was like, this, he must have, over the years, surely people have been saying to him about his diet and everything. And so I ended up just going and having a chat to him and just, he said he'd tried everything. And so I was like, well, I've got one thing, if you're interested that you might want to try. And so I went and printed out some stuff from Dr. McDougal, gave him forks over knives to take away the next day. And he sort of made a commitment that he would try this for a month if he was going to come back, and I was going to support him with it. And he'd weigh himself in a month because basically he needed the hospital scales to weigh himself. Mm-hmm. And so he came back in a month and he'd lost 10 kgs.
Ooh,
and so
wow.
he was floored by that and really, really excited,
Yeah.
But the other thing that he said to me, like, I can't remember whether it was that time or the next time he came in, he just sort of said, oh yeah, I've just started going to the gym. And so I think, and this is kind of like with the exercise thing, right? It's like, and even with sleep. So I think a lot of these things that we talk about in lifestyle medicine, yes, they're important, but people know that they should be doing these things. And a lot of the time, exercise especially is a bit of a no-brainer. And it gets pushed a lot of the time for being the reason that people, can't lose weight or overweight is because they don't exercise enough, they're lazy. And so that was one of the things that we really wanted to show, in addition to the fact that we thought, maybe people would just pick that up anyways, but we really wanted to exclude exercise to pretty much to every extent that we could. That we did have one session, I think about halfway through on sort of exercise because people were interested in it, but we weren't encouraging them specifically to exercise. We didn't discourage them from exercising.
You let it become a byproduct, because something I noticed with a lot of people that transition to a whole food plant-based way of eating is that they get this renewed energy and then they want to exercise. So they actually come
one
to me
thing
and
leads
say,
to the other.
Exactly. So it's almost a byproduct. The sleep, yes, go sleep your 8 to 9 hours and sleep the right hour. But when you're suffering from sleep apnea, well, that's easier said than done. But fix your eating, then their sleep quality improves. So I kind of get the angle you're taking. You're focusing on setting the foundation, because that's where it all starts, and then
And once people start winning at one thing as well, like it just, the rest of it kind of flows on as well. It gives them that confidence. It makes them feel like, even going to the gym, if you're really feeling like you're quite overweight and things, it can't be the easiest thing to do. And so,
because there's the risk of joint health, I mean, if they say, what should I do? Go for a run. Well, at 150 kgs, you could potentially do some damage, or, and that's the reality. So I guess you don't want to push something too far down one extreme when, again, and also if you focus too much on the exercise first, what you're doing is you're increasing the well, I guess it's it depends which perspective you're looking at it, but they could be hungrier. And then all of a sudden, instead of focusing on the right eating, they think, well, I'm hungry, I need to eat more. And then there's that mentality of, well, I'm burning it anyway. So you're not actually achieving your goals from the nutrition side of things because I'm exercising, I'm burning, so I can eat what I want, which is not true, but that's the mentality. So
yeah, totally.
yeah,
And sort of we wanted to make sure, because we knew when we got it published that if we had included exercise, then everyone was going to focus on that and how important the exercise was.
Yeah.
And just as there is already, and also for the participants, I think it was really important for them to realise that what was making the difference was how they were eating, so that they could maintain.
Absolutely.
And so. Yeah,
and the exercise is so much
really
harder to
amazing.
control, because how much are you exercising for and at what intensity, and it just throws a whole other spectrum that just, I guess, defeats the whole purpose of this study. So yeah. But now let's go back to the nutrition side. So what's really fascinating is it was an educational based approach as opposed to a spoon feeding approach, right? Here's your meal plan.
Yeah.
This is what you need to do. This is your shopping list. You've got to weigh things. You've got to count your calories. It was none of that. It was,
totally.
as you call it, an intervention. It was, it was, you went in there and provided information and gave them a choice.
Really love the traffic light system that you use too, because it's so simple. Everyone can understand that.
Yeah, that was pretty useful, I think, and we're working on something like that with DFN at the moment too. So hopefully the traffic light will be it'll be continued to use.
So explain to us a little bit about what the traffic light system is. What is it?
Well, basically what we were saying to people, right, is that they can eat as much as they want. There was no energy intake restriction as far as we were concerned. They weren't cutting calories. They weren't watching their portions. And this is one of the things that made it, we heard time and time again from them was the thing that they really enjoyed about it. They loved it because they could eat, basically as much as they want and still lose weight. But anyway, what we did was created sort of this traffic light system where we were saying foods that they can eat every day, foods that they should use sparingly, if at all, and foods that they should set aside and not use for the for the duration of the study. So
give us some high level examples for each category. So green, eat as much as you want.
So we encouraged them to have as many green leafy vegetables as they could, of course. I don't think many of them actually did that. But the green category is vegetables, fruit, and whole grains. Right. And, sauces and seasonings we also put in the green category for our study without any added oil, which is very similar to what Dr. McDougall suggests as well.
Yeah. And then the orange category, what did you include in that? Yeah,
so basically what we wanted to do was our real focus was on the energy density of foods with this and fat content as well, because we initially intended it to be like a replication to some extent of what Dr. Esselstyn was doing.
Yep.
And so we actually allowed people to have some things that would make their food taste better. And this is what Dr. McDougal does as well. And so salt, for example, was in the orange category. He didn't put that in the red. Sugar even was in the orange category, and other sweeteners. We know that sugar is not a health food, and most people aren't confused by the idea that they shouldn't be having loads of sugar. So we didn't see that as being too much of an issue. Like processed grains and that kind of thing, they can be in the orange category. And then your plant-based milks, that kind of stuff all ends up in that orange category. So it's kind of condiments, I suppose, things that you can use every now and then in order to make the foods a little bit more tasty and more palatable, especially when you're considering that these are people who literally somehow managed to think that when they were doing a plant-based diet, they could still eat cheese initially, upset about that, and who were also really offended by, because we were focusing on sort of this Esselstyn style plan or Ornish style plan, we also told them not to have avocados. And you could see, because avocados literally just falling off the trees in Gisborne. And so they were quite upset about that kind of thing already. So
now that's because of the high calorie density, the high saturated fat content for the purposes of the study. Was that the rationale behind that? And did nuts and seeds fall under that as well?
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah. They went in the red category as well. So we weren't popular around that. But the other reason too is, and I don't know whether you guys have ever tried this yourselves, but when I first started doing this, I started 100% Esselstyn style, so pretty strict. But what you find is that your taste buds change.
Yeah.
And so if you're using these, even your nuts and seeds and your so-called healthy fats and things, and Emma, I imagine you'd have something to say about that, but I'm not going to give you a chance, but maybe you can after. So basically, if you're using those, then the temptation is that you make your foods tasty with those things.
Yeah.
And so what we wanted them to learn was, and even the chefs, because we were teaching these chefs, they weren't plant-based chefs. They were just
I was going to ask
chefs.
about that because, they were cooking. So you obviously had to educate them as well as you had to educate your sort of your groups.
And there were some, some things that perhaps didn't quite fit into the categories, which even make our results even impressive, some bliss balls and stuff like that kind of got made, I think, that weren't really, that wouldn't pass muster. Yeah. But anyways, so because of those things, you just get really tempted just to use those things because they are tasty, and we know the reason they're tasty. That's because they're high in calorie density, and we naturally seek them out. Yeah. And so you can make your food, even at True North, right? So they were very, very strict on what they'd have, and they wouldn't even have many grains and stuff there because they really want people to lose weight. Mm-hmm. But about once a month or so, the kitchen would make like a tub of guacamole, and that would just we would be really lucky if we got any of that because everyone just wolfed it down, because it just tastes fantastic when you're used to eating these other things. Mm. And so the temptation really is to use those things to make the plant-based eating pattern, taste good. Whereas you get, like, if you're using those, then you're less likely to be using things like your spices and seasonings and all that kind of thing, and just the ways that you're cooking things to actually learn how to do it and how to cook properly. It's worthwhile, I think, going for a period where you don't have those things.
Yeah. Yep, absolutely.
We're going to take a break here. The next episode will feature part 2 of this chat. Thanks for listening.
Thank you for listening to the Lentil Intervention Podcast. If you found this interesting, make sure you subscribe and share it with your friends.